The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight on The Agenda, John Michael McGrath and I with our weekly On Poly podcast. Premier Ford knows that it drives Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, crazy every time the name Carolyn Parrish comes up. So I suspect the Conservative backroom people put that name in there for that reason.
I'm normally the more cynical observer of provincial politics, and today you're really giving me a run for my money.
Then, later on The Agenda.
Music is a very powerful storyteller. It has a way of kind of getting to the very heart of a situation and speaking truth to things that we don't have words for. And I think what I've tried to do with Life After is make it a very layered experience.
JMM, hello from Montreal, where I am hanging out this week. And as you can probably tell from the way I read that introduction, no teleprompter this week, so going off the laptop, that's all. Of course, I'm moderating one of the federal election leaders' debates, and we're going to tackle all the elements around those leader debates on a special Monday edition of our podcast. Today, we're going to stick to the events of the past week in the province of Ontario and at Queen's Park, because this was a rather historic week at Queen's Park, and we want to give it the time that we think it deserves.
Yeah, a bit of an accident of timing here where you need to be out of town for your obligations, but an important week at Queen's Park, return to the legislature, so we are going to try and make this all work regardless of any hiccups that come up.
Now, one thing we are not going to change is our traditional banter off the top about why we're wearing what we're wearing. And I want to start with this T-shirt that I'm wearing today, and I'm going to stand up because we can't see it in the shot right now, but here you go. That is former Ontario Premier Oliver Mowat. He was our third Premier, and we are coming up on the anniversary of his death. He died April 19th, 1903. That's 122 years ago tomorrow. He was 82 years old. I know that everybody is deeply impressed that Doug Ford just won his third consecutive majority government. Well, I want to tell you, Oliver Mowat won 6 straight majority governments. So Mr. Ford has a bit of a ways to go before he catches Mr. Mowat. Mr. Mowat, as you might imagine, is, of course, the longest-serving Premier of Ontario ever. He served more than 23 years between 1875 to 1898, and I want to show you him one more time. Look at those mutton chops. How's that for a 19th century look? Anyway, may he rest in peace, Oliver Mowat.
You know, he's one of these unsung fathers of Confederation in the sense that there's the text of the British North America Act and the Constitution, what it says, that really envisioned a very strong central federal government. And then when it actually came to practicing the politics of Canada, Oliver Mowat goes and he wins all of these major important court battles about the interpretation of the Constitution that fundamentally changed the way we run the country. You know, a lot of how we are governed today is not so much due to John A. Macdonald or the text that was hammered out at Charlottetown, but it's actually Oliver Mowat winning battle after battle against, in some cases, against John A. Macdonald. So really, really glad that you've got him on your shirt today.
Quite so. He was a big guy for provincial rights, one of the first guys to really plant the flag for provincial rights in our very young country at the time. Now, what have you got on today?
This, alas, is a shirt I've worn before. I don't have any former premiers or late governors, lieutenant governors to talk about today. I'm quite happy to cede the T-shirt spotlight to you.
Okay, understood. Now, let's raise one more thing before we get to our 3 issues today. I remember back in the day, and I'm going to go on a bit of an old fogey tour here. I'm talking about when John Robarts was the Premier of Ontario or when Bill Davis was the Premier. It was a typical thing for ministers of the Crown and their opposition critics to get together, to meet privately, to get to know each other better, to share notes and advice and that kind of thing. It was considered the collegial thing to do. And then apparently we went through a phase in politics where it was considered, traitorous to be seen with opposition members. You know, it got so tribal and ridiculous. And, you know, just because somebody is your political adversary doesn't make them your political enemy. It is for all of this reason, I put all this on the record because, and Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this picture here. This happened this past week, and I wanted to bring a little attention to it. That on the left is Economic Development Minister Vic Fideli from the riding of Nipissing. And on the right is Catherine Fife, who is his NDP critic from the riding of Waterloo. And they are simply getting together as this new session begins for a conversation. Now, besides being just the good and civil thing to do, let's also, talk turkey here. It's not a bad thing when Tories and New Democrats are getting along well because, of course, if they're up, that keeps the Liberals down, and that's in both of their interests to do that. But I won't get fixated on that today. I will just simply say good for them for getting together and demonstrating a little collegiality in public life.
Right, and it is one of those things that I think we don't always see the government respect the role that opposition MPPs can play, which is that they can be a kind of like intelligence gathering for the government, right? The government doesn't have seats in every part of Ontario, though it has them in most. But it's useful to hear from communities where you don't have MPPs necessarily elected and holding your party's banner. And so somebody like Vic Fideli is, I think, well aware, after more than a decade now at Queen's Park, that it's useful to keep those lines of communication open, just in a very sort of pragmatic way. Though you are quite right that there are also cynical reasons to do that as well.
Now, let's do one more postscript before we head to issue 1, shall we?
Yes, I have a quick correction to make from last week's episode. I had mentioned Mississauga Mayor Carolyn Parrish's use of strong mayor powers. I said incorrectly that she had used them to dismiss multiple people from the administration of Mississauga. Her office contacted us to correct the record. She did appoint a number of people in Mississauga's administration using strong mayor powers. But she only dismissed one person, the chief administrative officer of Mississauga. Certainly, I regret the error, and I'm happy to correct the record here.
Amen. And with that, let's get off to issue 1. The first speech from the throne for this 44th Parliament took place this past Tuesday. JMM, this is always one of the sort of glamour and spectacular events on the Queen's Park calendar every year. So let's separate this into 2 parts. We'll take a look at the policy that emerged from the speech, but we also want to talk about the theater of it all as well. So let's start with policy. What caught your eye?
I think the big theme for me was actually that there were not a ton of surprises. There were lots of things that had previously been announced, right, either in the election campaign or in some cases even before the recent election. So we got promises like the 401 tunnel was reiterated, and it pains me a little bit, but nevertheless, the promise to remove bike lanes in Toronto also made it into the throne speech. The government had previously introduced legislation to allow municipalities more leeway, more authority to clear homeless encampments. The government is proposing to reintroduce that legislation. It died on the order paper after when the election was called. The speech also included a commitment to greater interprovincial free trade. That was an issue that came up during the election, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And also, the government has announced measures to clear the regulatory path for new mines, particularly in the province's north, and very particularly the Ring of Fire. So that one I want to drill in on just for a moment, because I don't think that the government had gotten very specific in the details of what it was looking for, but this week they did announce that they're introducing legislation to create special economic zones, basically, where either one or multiple mineral deposits are either known to exist or are believed to exist, and they are going to create a new sort of regulatory framework to make it much easier and faster to open mines. Government saying that it currently takes something like 15 years to open a mine in Ontario, and we can talk about the Ring of Fire, which I think was first announced as a provincial priority, I want to say 2009, 2010, and it is 2025, and it is still not an operating mine. So, the government says, and I'm going to quote here from the throne speech, that mining operators that meet high operating safety and environmental standards will get those streamlined approvals. We did get a bit more of a clearer picture of what that means on Thursday. The government will introduce legislation, really spelling this out in more detail. But those are some of the big policy points.
Okay, let's talk now about the spectacle of the thing, because it really is it's a brilliant tradition. It goes way back. And I don't want to go so far back. I only want to go back 7 years in making my first comment here. What a difference this throne speech was from the first one that Doug Ford brought in as Premier back in 2018. You may remember on that occasion there was constant hooting and hollering from the progressive conservative backbenches. At one point, the Lieutenant Governor of the day, Elizabeth Dowdeswell, looked up from her speech. She went like this. She was reading the speech. She looked up at the Conservative caucus and she paused, very dramatic pause. And if I didn't know better, I'd swear she was staring daggers at them, because it's almost as if she was saying, can you barbarians please behave yourself? This is a hundreds-year-old tradition, and you are treating it like a frat house party. Anyway, this year's speech was completely different. It was read by Edith Dumont, who is the new lieutenant governor in the province. Everybody, Tory backbenchers, everybody listened very respectfully. It was a return to the kind of sanctity of tradition that we have seen in years past at Queen's Park, so that was good. It's always interesting to see who gets mentioned in these things, Jan Man, because, well, there's different reasons why people get mentioned. The mayor of Vaughan, Stephen Del Duca, got a mention in the throne speech, which is kind of amazing when you consider that he and Doug Ford were bitter adversaries going back to the 2022 election. Carolyn Parrish, the mayor of Mississauga, she got mentioned, probably because Premier Ford knows that it drives Bonnie Crombie, the Liberal leader, crazy every time the name Carolyn Parrish comes up. So I suspect the Conservative backroom people put that name in there for that reason alone.
I'm normally the more cynical observer of provincial politics, and today you're really giving me a run for my money.
I don't think there's anything cynical about that observation. I think it's spot on. Anyway, that was some of the theater that caught my eye. How about you?
I think we have to mention the repeated invocation of Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Not surprising given everything that has come in the weeks before this throne speech, but the really central role that he is playing in the government's messaging of its agenda going forward. He is named 12 times in the speech, and then in the last instance is simply referred to as the current occupant of the White House, which I enjoyed. And I am a person who I appreciated Thomas Jefferson when I was younger, and I read some of his writings, and I do always enjoy whenever somebody quotes Jefferson's claim during the War of 1812 that America capturing Canada would be what he said would be a mere matter of marching. Of course, it turned out not to be. Yeah, I enjoyed those aspects of the speech.
Good. Let's circle back a little bit to policy here, because one of the significant sections of the throne speech focused on breaking down trade barriers through new legislation. We know now that the legislation being referred to there is called the Protect Ontario Through Free Trade Within Canada Act. These names are, I don't know who picks these names, but anyway, it does sum it up what it's all about. The province of Ontario wants, quote, no restrictions, no red tape, just free trade within Canada. Now, why don't you give us some of the specifics on that, because Premier Ford was not the only premier to attend a news conference and unveil some of the specifics of that.
That's right. He had Premiers Tim Houston and Susan Holt of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, respectively, at Queen's Park this week. They signed MOUs committing the three provinces to clearing away various interprovincial trade barriers between those three provinces. Obviously, the government would like to get more premiers to sign future MOUs. This is part of a larger package of announcements the government is making this week about interprovincial trade, including new legislation, the title of which you read there earlier. The legislation, the intention is to make it easier for Ontarians to buy things from other provinces, and also to make it easier for people in other provinces to move and work here. You know, and we can go back to immediately after COVID, and the government's measures to address the healthcare crisis included things like faster recognition of medical credentials from outside of Ontario. They're now expanding that. Currently, it's for medical professions that have a sort of streamlined approval process. They're going to include many more medical professions as well. They are going to kind of take the same philosophy for a lot of skilled trades. They want to make it easier for, let's say, an electrician to move from Alberta and come to Ontario and work here. The government's going to give them 6 months where they're sort of presumptively okay to work here while they formally get their credentials certified here in Ontario. If you enjoy drinking alcohol out there, the provinces are working on allowing consumers to buy beer or wine directly from producers in other provinces. Currently, if you want to buy Vancouver wine or, I don't know, spirits from Alberta, you have to order through the LCBO. That's the only way you can legally do that in Ontario, unless you personally drive to Quebec and cross the border. We don't know quite yet what that process is going to look like. We also don't know what the fiscal hit to the LCBO might be, right? Like the government gets a lot of money from the LCBO, and if consumers start ordering alcohol outside of the LCBO system, that might have implications for provincial revenues. The government didn't have any answers about that this week. And the government is also, as part of this legislative package, promising to work on mutual recognition of regulations. So the example the government provided, or one of the examples they provided, was high visibility vests, the kind of like glow in the dark vests that you see people wearing when they're working on like road projects. These things are regulated differently in different provinces. They have to look slightly different. The government says they are going to recognize the regulations of other provinces who agree to recognize ours, so that, for example, if you're a firm that owns a bunch of high visibility vests in Quebec, you don't have to buy a separate supply of vests to do road work in Ontario. So those kinds of things are what the government is looking at.
You mentioned mining a few minutes ago, and let's come back to that as well, and how difficult it has been to open a mine in this country and in this province in particular. What does the throne speech, and excuse me, not just the throne speech, but this new legislation have to say about that?
Right. So they are introducing on Thursday the legislation entitled the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, another one of those titles that we love. The law has the goal of reducing wait times for the permits that mines require. It's going to reduce the timeline by about 50%. That's the stated goal. It overhauls environmental assessment requirements for several sites, not just mines, interestingly enough. It also includes the Ontario Place redevelopment there, which we're going to talk about later in the pod. It also is exempting Ontario Place from certain requirements about posting regulations to the Environmental Registry of Ontario. That's a website where people can go and they can make public comment based on things the government is doing or permitting. This whole issue of mines in Northern Ontario, of course, has a certain salience because the government believes this is a key way to buttress our economy because of Donald Trump, again, mentioned in the throne speech. The government believes that we can be a resource for critical minerals for the United States and for our own manufacturing base, and they are trying to pitch Ontario as a reliable supplier to the Americans, even as China, for example, cuts off the supply of rare earth elements. That was a response to Donald Trump's tariffs. I think one important point to note here is that we can talk about the government changing environmental legislation or permits, but we need to remember that there are, of course, Indigenous rights when we're talking about mines in Northern Ontario. The government cannot simply legislate those away. It says it is committed to honoring its obligations under the duty to consult that is a constitutional requirement. So we're going to have to see how they strike that balance, right? How you accelerate the approval of these mines while also respecting Indigenous rights. It's very important to get that balance correct if you actually want to accelerate the construction and operation of these mines and not just have them snarled in courts for months or years to come.
Absolutely. Okay, that's our look at this first throne speech from this 44th Parliament, the first one of the third term of Doug Ford's government, and the ensuing legislation to come from that throne speech. Good, a good summation of things. And with that, let's move on to issue 2. Well, for the first time ever in the history of the Ontario legislature, there is now a female Speaker of the legislature. Her name is Donna Skelly. She is the PC member for Flamborough-Glanbrook. Ontario got its first female MPP in 1943, its first female cabinet minister in 1972, its first female premier in 2013, but it took 158 years for us to get our first female Speaker of the legislature. So let's have a look at that historic moment.
Honorable members, you have elected Donna Skelly, member for Flamborough.
I am so honored and I feel so privileged that you put your trust in me to be the 44th Speaker of the Ontario Legislature. But more importantly, I'm so humbled that I'm the first woman in provincial history.
A very nice moment for Donna Skelly. Why don't you tell us more about the new speaker, JMM?
Well, so she's a former journalist, something we can both appreciate. She served as the deputy speaker in the previous legislature, and her competitor in this race was Jennifer French, the MPP from the New Democrats for Oshawa. And not hugely surprising, given that the PC caucus was almost certain to put one of its own members up for speaker, but she did defeat French on the one and only ballot. There was a really lovely moment when her victory was announced there. She was being walked towards the speaker's chair, as they traditionally do, and she hugged a few members, and then French actually came out of the bench in the NDP side and walked over, and they both had a bit of a hug, and there were cheers in the legislature. They do, of course, do the traditional sort of strong-arming. You theatrically drag the elected member to the speaker's chair, because historically, sometimes, back in ancient history, speakers sometimes lost their head for defying the king. Here in Ontario, nobody's ever lost their head, but the speaker used to be just appointed directly by the premier, and for the past 3 decades or so, MPPs themselves have elected the speaker. So this is just one of those elections now that still finds a way to make history. Skelly, of course, replaces Ted Arnott, who was the speaker in the last legislature, who, after 35 years at Queen's Park, opted not to run again in the February election.
It's interesting. I think we can go back to Margaret Marland, which is almost 30 years ago, who was the first woman to run for speaker once the job became something elected by the members of the Ontario legislature. And for a number of reasons, she was the first, but certainly not the last woman to run to become speaker. But it never happened for a variety of reasons along the way. And here we are in 2025, and it finally happens. And I guess I should note, it's a Hamiltonian who gets the job first. So well done, Donna Skelly.
I was going to say, I'm not as familiar with the intricacies of the geography, but it is safe to call that a Hamilton area riding, right?
You're darn right it is. Yes, it is. Yeah. So there we go. And with that, we're off to issue 3. The New York Times has published an investigation into the Terme Group, which is building that spa at Ontario Place. The article says that Terme exaggerated its track record and misled the province to secure the deal. JMM, what else do we need to know here?
Right. So the interesting reporting for the New York Times here is that, there were 2 Therme companies. There is the company called Therme Erding that has operated a spa complex in Germany, which opened in 1999. Then there's Therme Group that operates a spa in Romania, which opened in 2016. The owners of both Therme Erding and Therme Group knew one another, but they are 2 separate entities, or they were 2 separate entities. In 2017, the owner of the German spa died in a plane crash, and after that, Therme Group, according to the New York Times, essentially took the success of the German business and referenced it in its submission to the province when it was applying, as multiple companies did, applied to redevelop Ontario Place. In 2019, there was a strategic partnership developed between the 2 companies, and then in 2024, Therme Group bought Therme Erding. So now they are in fact the same company, but when Therme Group won the bid to redevelop Ontario Place, they were totally separate companies, and the allegation here is that Therme Group was functionally trading on the reputation of a different company.
And the obvious question for follow-up is this something the province of Ontario should have caught?
Well, it sure seems like it, right? In December of 2024, the Auditor General disputed how many facilities were owned and operated by Therme Group. So this is not entirely new information. The AG was critical of Infrastructure Ontario's role in ensuring the accuracy and the submission. The AG was very critical of Infrastructure Ontario's role in ensuring the accuracy of that submission at the time, and had said that there were real failures in terms of the competitiveness and basic sort of transparency of that process. The New York Times article also mentions that there was reduced oversight on the province's side, and folks may remember this from our discussion of that Auditor General report. There was no independent third party to oversee the call for redevelopment there.
Now, people with eagle ears, not just eagle eyes, may notice that you and I are pronouncing this company's name differently. You're calling it Therme, which I guess is the English pronunciation. I'm calling it Terme because technically the German pronunciation of the word doesn't pronounce the H rather.
Yes.
So we're both right. But anyway, that's just an explanation for it. Terme obviously has something to say about their views on what has transpired in the New York Times story. What are they saying, in fact?
So in an email, Strategy Corp, who is doing the corporate communications for the spa, said the story is inaccurate. They say Terme passed a financial test to earn the lease and that they followed the rules of the bidding process. Following the rules of the bidding process is separate from the allegation that the bidding process itself was not correct, so I will just leave that to our listeners. But at one point, the article points to an email from one Infrastructure Ontario advisor who wrote that the company had low liquidity and was not cash flow positive. The article notes that as it was pitching the project, auditors found it had less than $1.1 million in equity. So the writer of this New York Times story did say on X, formerly Twitter, that this investigation isn't about corruption per se. It is about what happens when private companies collide with the public sector, which often includes coming under the scrutiny of offices like the Auditor General of Ontario, whose reporting, as I say, was used in this investigation.
Now, just as a reminder, we should say that the province of Ontario has given Terme, the Terme Group, a 95-year lease on land at Ontario Place and will be subsidizing the construction of said project to the tune of around $2.2 billion. The opposition politicians at Queen's Park, as you may not be surprised, had a fairly strong reaction to this news. Marit Stiles of the official opposition NDP had this to say. Marit Stiles.
This was a government that was elected to protect Ontarians, not to scam them. Okay, we pointed out from day one that there were questions about the financial status, stability of that company. We've questioned from the beginning why the government would go into this deal in the first place when it meant a massive subsidization by government for something that, frankly, very few people in Ontario will be able to make use of.
And just a reminder for our listeners that the Integrity Commissioner has said that they will not be taking up the complaint that the NDP filed over this deal. The NDP alleges that Terme Group received preferential treatment. Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie also posted online saying, quote, "This deal does not pass the sniff test." So we are going to put a link to the New York Times story, of course, in the show notes of this episode for our listeners and viewers.
And I suspect this is not going to be the last time we talk about this story.
Has not been for years now.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. And with that, let's get off to Your Column, My Column. Okay, it's time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I have a little chat about the columns that we wrote for the TVO website, tvo.org, this past week. John Michael, what are you going to start us with?
So I wrote a bit more about interprovincial trade. We've talked a lot about this already, and I'm not going to rehash those. A lot of the measures that we've already discussed are pretty important and substantial things that I think will matter to, certainly if you're looking for healthcare services in Ontario, for example. One big item that got a lot of play by the government, on the other hand, sounds more dramatic than it will actually end up being, and that is removing Ontario's exceptions under what's called the Canada Free Trade Agreement. This is an agreement amongst the provinces and the federal government that basically says goods and services and people should be allowed to move across provincial borders in this country unless there are specific exceptions. So Ontario had 23 exceptions written into this agreement. It is now removing those exceptions. And that sounds like a big deal, except it's not going to be, at least not initially, because the government is also saying that while it's not it's removing those exceptions under the CFTA, it is not changing any of the underlying policies. The only thing this seems to mean in practice is that a business or person who believes that they're being treated unfairly by one of the Government of Ontario's policies could now try and use the CFTA process to challenge that policy, the underlying policy. This process, as far as I can tell, is barely used at all under the current CFTA. So I don't expect there to be like a ton of change very quickly from that announcement. But I think it's worth noting, because even though this kind of thing is not like super important, and it's not as important as some of the other measures that were announced this week, I think it's worth noting that like it's not like a super technical term, but like the vibes have changed on interprovincial trade in a big way in the last few months. And I think this was always one of those ideas that governments would say, oh, well, like, sure, we all agree interprovincial free trade would be a good idea, but like sometime in the future. And what I think we're seeing now is like the future is now. Like for the first time, really, premiers are taking this seriously, and like this is not something that they are putting on the back burner anymore. So that was my column for this week. Steve, how about you?
Boy, I got to say, first of all, I never thought the vibe shift would include interprovincial free trade in this country. That is really, that's quite nerdy, I got to say, JMM, but okay, here we go. Well, given that I'm in Montreal right now for the federal election leaders debate, I thought I'd let people in on a little bit of the behind the scenes that takes place here in Montreal. For reasons that are not completely understood by me, this is the 9th time that I've been asked to moderate an election leaders debate. I think the 5th one federally. I've done 4 provincial ones. I can tell you they are definitely nerve-wracking affairs, not just for the leaders, but also for the moderators. You do not want to screw up. You do not want to harm somebody's chances of doing well on the night. So, yeah, I haven't been sleeping a lot lately. Let's put it that way. That column is up right now. I've got a few stories in the column about how things rolled out over the years. There were some kind of crazy screw-ups along the way, and I do detail those. I'll have a second column coming up as well, hopefully by the time this airs on TVO on Friday night, with some of the behind-the-scenes stuff about this year's leaders debate. So a lot of stuff in both columns that I don't think you're going to see anywhere else, and I hope people will dive in.
And with that, let's go to the mailbag.
If you've got a burning question or insightful comment for us, we would love it if you'd send it to us at this special email address, onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, tee us up for this week if you would.
Here we have a question from Alex Whalen in Markham, who writes, Dear Steve and JMM, love the show, especially your weekly t-shirt show and tell. It might be time for your listeners/watchers to have their own t-shirt that reads, Proud to be an on-poly nerd. Could you update us on Ontario's new extended producer responsibility recycling system? How is the rollout going? What changes can we expect to see at the curbside in the foreseeable future? Knowing that the goal is incentivizing producers to use more sustainable packaging, how confident are you that this will happen? Thanks for the great work. Alexis Whalen, Markham.
JMM, this one's got your name all over it. Take it away, my friend.
Right. So extended producer responsibility makes producers responsible for the waste they create. So no offense to makers of instant coffee machines here, but I'm going to start with the idea of like an espresso machine. They used to come with red bags that you could mail back to them with the used coffee pods. Ironically, the mail-in package they used was probably used only ever one time, so might have actually created more waste than it saved. The issue with traditional recycling programs is that it often costs more to create the recycled materials than the materials are worth or than the revenue that it generates. So putting that cost onto private businesses is helpful for the public purse in that sense, right? It does require businesses, however, businesses require rather people to drop the products off themselves rather than necessarily then picking it up directly.
In which case, is the province of Ontario changing the Blue Box program for recycling in order to accommodate this?
Right. So this is the big question that the province has been working on now for many, many years. And I mean, this is actually an issue that the Ford government inherited from the Liberals. And it's one of the few things that they more or less kept intact from the Liberal government. The transition within the Blue Box program is supposed to be complete by January 1st of next year. Outside of the Blue Box, you've got like tires, rechargeable batteries, electrical equipment, and hazardous chemicals. Those are products where producers are actually already supposed to be responsible for recycling them. If you buy like a box of batteries, you might see on the receipt a recycling charge. Ontario will be expanding its targets for these programs into 2030. We're going to see if companies like Amazon, for example, start having to collect the mountains of cardboard boxes that they create in their distribution of goods. I would say it's unclear, a bit up in the air, whether the province will actually reach its current goal by next year and what compliance for all of these different companies will actually end up looking like.
Is the plan ultimately to render unnecessary the blue box program that most of us do right now?
Not quite. Certainly, I think municipalities and the province would be happy if there was less of a burden placed on the blue bin system. For now, the immediate hope is, or rather the requirement is going to be that the producers will actually assume the cost of the blue bin program, and that municipal taxpayers won't have to pay for it out of their property tax bill. There are some unanswered questions about this whole system, right? The biggest one being, with all the changes in alcohol sales in this province right now, and with beer store locations closing, what are we going to be doing with beer cans and wine bottles, right? Currently, you can return those to beer store locations. As the beer store, I think many people would expect it largely to wind down. There is a question of whether we keep that extremely successful recycling and reuse program that the beer store has operated for many decades, or whether those cans and bottles end up making it into the blue bin program instead, whether that replaces them. The government had also briefly talked about maybe expanding that deposit return program that the beer store operates into things like, Coke bottles and orange juice jugs and those kinds of things, other beverage containers. The government has considered that and then shot it down and considered it again and shot it down again over the years. Who knows what the next step will be there, but we are, of course, keeping an eye on it. Again, if people want to ask about the show, they can email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
Excellent. And with that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, April 18th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
JMN, before we go, we got to do sort of a virtual exchange of sugar, which we usually do off the top, but we didn't do today because we're not in the same city. Can we do this virtually? Let me see. No, I got to go the other way here. I'm going to put my hand towards, there we go. Okay, I think we figured it out. And with that, bye-bye.
Bye.
When we think of musical theater today, we might think of the big productions such as The Lion King or Mean Girls, which are typically based on very familiar stories. So, what does it take to produce an original musical in Canada when that's your competition? Britta Johnson might just have the answer. She is a composer and lyricist and also the creator of Life After, a musical about a teenage girl dealing with grief, which makes its return to the stage at the CAA Ed Mirvish Theatre in downtown Ontario's capital city. And here's Britta Johnson joining us now for more. So great to meet you.
So great to meet you.
It's a pleasure. Well, let's start with basically what your show is about. Life After is about what?
It follows this 16-year-old girl named Alice in the immediate aftermath of her semi-famous father's very sudden death. We kind of exist in her mind, in her imagination, as she tries to make sense of it, deals with grieving for the first time. It's about growing up. It's about family. It's about figuring out who you are, being a teenager, and all of those things set to song.
Well, you've anticipated where I want to go now, because this does not exactly sound like, Mary Poppins or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, to use two references that are very current today, of course. This is heavy stuff, so why a musical treatment?
I mean, music is a very powerful storyteller. It has a way of kind of getting to the very heart of a situation and speaking truth to things that we don't have words for. And I think what I've tried to do with Life After is make it a very layered experience. I think grief is a kaleidoscopic experience. It's devastating, but it's also funny and strange and kind of fractures the reality that you're living in. And music has this way of holding all of that, all of those kind of idiosyncratic truths. So in making this score, I tried to do that, and it's been a really rich experience for me. And there's nothing like a song to get to the center of something we don't quite have language for, which I think grieving and growing up are two things that would fall under that category.
When did you write your first musical?
I wrote my first musical when I was 14, I think. For my high school, I wrote a one-act show, and I've kind of been doing it ever since. So,
well, I would never ask you how old you are, but how many years ago was that?
Well, I'm not good at math, so I'll tell you, I'm 33.
So almost 20 years ago, you wrote your first musical.
Yes.
And have done how many since then?
Oh, man, probably like 18 or something. I've been very lucky to get to keep working, so it's been a privileged thing, yeah.
What do you think drew you to this form of entertainment in the first place?
Well, I grew up in Stratford, Ontario, so home of a lot of theater, a lot of music theater. Both my parents were pit musicians in the orchestra there, so I really kind of grew up in the orchestra pit. When we couldn't find childcare, we'd go see Man of La Mancha for like the 17th time. So it was kind of in our blood. I have 2 older sisters. We make a lot of music together, and very quickly, I didn't think music theater would be where I landed, but it's a language I seem to understand simply because of what was happening in my house.
But you didn't come out with To Be or Not to Be. You came out with Song and Dance.
Well, I guess because I was in the orchestra pit. You know, my parents were brass players, so if they were Shakespearean actors, perhaps I'd follow a different path.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Shall we see some of what you do?
Sure.
I think it's an idea. Sheldon, if you would, a clip, please. Nice close-up of your hands in that, incidentally.
Yes, here they are, live on TV.
She's got a great voice. Who is she?
That's Isabella Essler. She's incredible. I think she's about to be a huge star. She's only 21 years old, and she's playing our lead, and every day I'm pretty astounded by what she's doing.
Sensational.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that song?
It's actually one of the very first songs I ever wrote in my life. So it's a bit of a personal show, this one, because I lost my dad when I was young, when I was 13, and very soon after that started to write music. So when I didn't know it would be for a musical when I wrote this song, but I was just kind of trying to make sense of a lot of things that weren't making a lot of sense to me at that time. There was a few big losses in my teenage life, and that's the texture, at least, that inspired this story. And even though I'm not our lead character in this family isn't mine, at least that kind of coming of age through grief is my story. And that song is kind of the one that started it all. And the show has kind of blossomed from that first song, which is one of the first songs I ever wrote. So it's a...
You have been hanging on to that song for 20 years, waiting for the right vehicle for it, I guess, right?
I guess, yeah. I mean, the truth is I started to write the show soon after that. It's had this very long life with me. It's really grown up with me. It's been a very beautiful kind of time capsule for my whole experience as a composer, yeah.
How old was your dad when he died?
I guess 55, yeah. He was pretty young.
How did he die?
He had cancer, leukemia. So different than the story in this show, but still a transformative loss, I would say. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Does the character in your show basically reflect all of the experiences that you had back in the day?
Certainly, she has some of her own. She's kind of not grieving the same way I did. I just kind of like grew out my bangs too long and got kind of weird and quiet, not so theatrical. But certainly a lot of those first questions you ask, the first time something's taken from you before you're ready, are things that I share with her, for sure.
Musicals, I gather, are not just sort of written and then locked in. This is a very iterative process, right? So where did it start? How did it develop? Take us through it.
Yeah, it's been a really cool journey for this show. So it premiered in the Toronto Fringe Festival back in 2016. So we had our set was 5 chairs, and I was playing piano on the side. And from there we were picked up for our professional debut at Canadian Stage here in Toronto. And then it's had this remarkable journey where we've played at 2 huge houses in the States. We were in San Diego at the Old Globe. We went to the Goodman Theatre in Chicago. And now it's this kind of incredible homecoming for us to be at the Ed Mirvish Theatre back in Toronto with sort of the community that's responsible for the show's success to begin with.
That's not a small stage.
It's a big stage. Yeah, it's.
No, how many seats is that place?
I mean, I think we are selling about 1,100 for our run. Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very exciting.
So this is a big deal.
It's definitely the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. So yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
Now, okay, I suggested in the introduction that we see lots of musical theater come through this city, and a lot of it is kind of either brought back from you remember when, or repurposed, or anyway, it's stuff that already has kind of a big name out there in some respects. Is it difficult to sell people on a completely original musical nowadays?
Probably, but we have really smart people trying to get the word out there, and we're hoping that word of mouth will help us. But I do find that audiences in this city are hungry for something new. We've been the audience here in Toronto is really responsible for the success this show has had. You know, we sold out our Fringe run, and then we sold out our Canadian stage run. It feels like there's something at the center of this that people are really connecting to, and it's very exciting that we get to share it with a wider audience than ever. It's very cool.
Yeah, I don't mean to diss the others. Like, I saw Lion King when it first came here, and I saw it again when it came back, and, you know, there's a great deal of comfort and joy in that. But what do you get from an original musical that perhaps you don't get from something that's much better known to you and had many iterations?
Yeah, I mean, you get something new, something surprising. You get to be surprised by what you feel in the theater. I think we all remember what it feels like to hear a song that we love for the first time, or a song that we connect to that gets to the center of something that feels like the truth for us. So I love new musicals because it's amazing to witness that for the very first time, especially with a live audience, with a community. So I'm hoping that people will get excited about what we're doing at the Edinburgh this year. Yeah.
Do you want this to go to Broadway someday?
You know, I wouldn't say no. Of course, of course.
Well, I'll tell you why. I mean, it's a complicated question nowadays, because a lot of people, a lot of Canadians have decided they don't want to have anything to do with the United States right now.
Yes.
So that's kind of why I ask.
Yeah, it's a complex question, and probably with a complex answer, and I don't know what it looks like, but I do know that that is the place where amazing new ideas launch, and that's so many amazing things happening with the community there, and we'll see what happens, and we'll also see what I feel like our world is changing so much every day, and we're just taking it day by day.
Is it, well, I mean, everything's harder in Canada when it comes to the arts, right? So to ask the question is almost to answer it, but I presume you've got friends in the States who do a lot of the same work that you do. Is it easier for them because they're in the States, and it's harder for us because we're in Canada, it's so much smaller, et cetera?
I mean, I think being a freelance artist is pretty hard for everybody, for sure. I do think there's just a lot more of musical theater in the States, more theaters doing new musicals, so just a bit more opportunity for writers there. But I do think there's a very exciting thing happening with in Canada. I think that people are getting excited about new work, starting to ask how we can support Canadian work. There's very smart producers and thinkers starting to kind of create some homegrown work, and I'm very excited to be a part of that and keep building this community.
Can I ask you a completely inappropriate question?
Sure.
Because people who make their living in the arts in this country, the average, I mean, I know what the average wage is, right? It's below the poverty line for the average. So, like, how much money do you make?
Well, I'm not going to give you an exact number, but I've been really lucky. I've been really lucky to get to do this as my full-time job for a while now. I've had a very blessed path in that I got going early, and there's very cool artistic directors here who've been working in partnership with me. So it changes so much year to year. Last year I was part of the team that wrote the Tim Hortons musical. That helped me pay off my student loan, but I am lucky to call this my full-time job, and it's a very dynamic and rich full-time job that comes with a lot of challenges, but I think there are a lot of really smart thinkers trying to make it continue to flourish. Artists' lives continue to flourish in Canada, and I hope to continue to be a part of that.
You know, I never did see the Tim Hortons musical. I never made it to it. Was it any good?
I thought so,
Yeah?
of course. Imagine if I said no.
Well, it's after the fact. You can tell us if it...
I'm so proud of what we made, to be honest. I'm so proud of what we made. Yeah, we had an amazing team, truly, yeah.
You obviously, when you undertook this work, had I mean, everybody I know who makes their work in culture has huge dreams about the possibilities out there and what they are hoping happens to them. So let us in on a bit of that. What are you hoping for?
I hope to just keep doing this and doing it with people who are smarter than I am. I've been really lucky to have an amazing community of collaborators and a kind of rich and very dynamic artistic life, and that feels like a privilege. It isn't easy, and not everyone is granted that privilege, so I just hope I get to keep doing it in a way that continues to challenge and expand what I'm able to do. Yeah.
Have your family members seen this show at the big theater yet?
They haven't seen it yet. But they're about to.
They're going to see it.
Yes.
On the big stage.
Yes.
So they've seen it in the Fringe.
Yes.
But not on the big stage.
And every I have a very supportive family. I've seen every iteration that we've done, and each one kind of has gotten bigger. But I think this is the biggest, and I think it'll be a very intense experience for my mother.
I was absolutely, I mean, you're good. You've anticipated my next question, which is when your mom watches this, and it obviously hits so close to home, I mean, how has she reacted so far to it all?
I think it's a very rich experience for her. And I have like the best mom in the world, and she's the best musician I know, and I love talking to her about art. So I love talking to her about this show, and it's a lot to receive, but I think we've built a show that makes people feel held in their grief, the complexity of it. I think it's been a really beautiful thing for our relationship to be able to talk openly about grief together. And yeah, I'm so lucky to have her support. She's so on the level, and I pretty much run every idea I have past her because she's a really smart artist herself.
She's still playing?
She's not playing anymore. She's retired, but we always make a lot of music together in many capacities. Yeah.
Siblings?
I got 2 older sisters.
2 older sisters? Mm-hmm. They've seen previous incarnations of the show?
My eldest sister actually has worked on every incarnation. She played the lead in our Fringe production, has since been our dramaturg, which is kind of like the editor of the show. We're very close collaborators. We are a songwriting team, and on a lot of other projects, she's also a songwriter. So she's been very close. She's like right next to me in rehearsal a lot. And my middle sister lives overseas. She's an opera singer, but she has seen many iterations as well.
Did any of them, this will be a bit too personal, but here we go anyway, did any of them object to the fact that you were taking what is also their story, after all, and putting it out there for everybody to see?
No, they didn't, and I think it helps that it really isn't our story. Like the loss, this is a quite sudden loss. It's a different age group, a different family configuration, the journey that it takes. The only thing I'm borrowing from is just that texture and the questions that come with grief. I think, no one has objected, but it's invited a lot of really open conversations about our experience, which has been quite healing, actually. Yeah.
Does a day go by when you don't think of your dad?
No, of course not.
Still?
Yeah, I think everyone who has lost someone they love would feel the same way. But I think it's a gift. I like to feel him close, and when I work on this show, I feel him quite close, and that's been a real blessing for me. So. I think of him often and fondly, and that's a rich part of my life. Mm-hmm.
Well, almost everybody who sits in that chair, having done a play or a show or something like that, I've seen the show ahead of time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you heard, there's a little election and a little leaders debate going on this week, so it's been tough.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get to see this show after this airs,
Fabulous.
And I can't wait.
I can't wait to have you.
Yeah. So good of you to come in today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And share all this with us. Britta, thank you very much, and can't wait to see it. People find out about your Canadian background, and then the subject perhaps turns to Trump. What do people say to you?
Any tips on how to immigrate to Canada?
Really?
Uh-huh. Yes, and of course that's a cliche, but I actually think that this time many more mean it. And it would be ironic, wouldn't it, if Canada had to seal its southern border?
We're going to build a wall.
Right, exactly. But all kidding aside, I really think, and maybe we can get into this later, but I actually think that there are huge opportunities here for Canada. I know that it is natural to live in a defensive crouch right now. Protect. I get that completely. And I think when we have embarked steadily on the road to defending our sovereignty, we can open up a little bit to look at what it will take to recruit paying students from the United States whose families are just disgusted with this administration and want their kids to be educated in a different part of the world.
Well, back in the day, it was always called the brain drain, right? People leaving Canada for the States, and now you could call it the brain gain, or you could call it the Trump bump. We hear that. That we're getting the Trump bump. The reason I ask you the question is that when I talk to Americans, and I do, frequently what they say to me is, I'm so sorry. We're so sorry about what's going on. This is not us. This is just the president. Do you get that? Do you hear that?
I don't hear that very much. Again, because I work with a lot of universities and K-12 schools, the Republicans whom I have occasion to interact with are younger. And I can honestly tell you that there is a cult of personality with Trump. And so they're not apologetic. What they are is overly faithful in his ability to pull rabbits out of hats.
I had the honor of interviewing Mikhail Gorbachev for this television station, and I asked him if he believed the West was actually trying to actively hold Russia down. Let's see what he said.
Russia is a competitor. Russia is an educated country, well-educated people, tremendous resources, perhaps half the resources of the world are in Russia. And if that country gains momentum, it will be a competitor. In a very competitive market, there will be another competitor. So some people in the West think pragmatically, let Russia be down as long as possible. But that would not be, in my opinion, the best style of handling relations with Russia. The best style is partnership, alliance, and friendship. A calm Russia, a stable Russia, a successfully developing democratic Russia is a lot better than an unstable Russia.
In which case, in spite of everything you just said, should we be cheering on a closer relationship between the United States and Russia?
I think for the future, a closer relationship between the United States and Russia is a good thing. The question is what actually allows for this close relationship to prosper. If you're building a close relationship on the basis of Russia's domination of its neighbors, or you look away when the Russians basically run over Ukraine or waging an aggressive war, I don't think that is a healthy foundation for a long-term partnership. Gorbachev just spoke about democracy. Well, Russia is not a democratic country. Russia is a dictatorship today, right? So having a wonderful relationship with a dictatorship that Russia is today, is that good for the future of the world? I don't know. Worse things have happened, I suppose. We'll see how it turns out, but I don't have great expectations from the current effort by President Trump to re-engage with Russia on that basis.
Next week on the agenda.
The more we are prepared, the more fun we're having, and the more smiles there are, the more loose we feel on stage, and all of that permeates the crowd.
That's next week on the agenda.